Because I believe that it's the right thing for the country, and without sounding too pious about it, I actually think at the end of the day the motivation why most people go and should go into politics is because they want to do what's right for the country they love. And I really do worry that all the other alternatives now, since no one's going to win an outright majority, in other words the prospect of a lurch to the left and excessive reckless borrowing as Ed Miliband has to dance to the tune of Alex Salmond, or a lurch to the right as David Cameron has to dance to the tune of his own right wing and impose ever more ideological cuts on public services. I really worry about those alternatives and what it will do to our country, and that's why I think we need to remain anchored in the centre ground, act responsibly and fairly, provide stability, which is incredibly important, particularly given the fragility of the economic recovery, and I think that can only be done with Liberal Democrats backing government in sizable numbers.
Yeah, but there are two problems with that. One is that that's not what it appears the public want, according to just about every opinion poll since 2010. And the other problem, of course, is you are a party leader. You appear to be saying you'd be prepared to sacrifice your party in the service of the government.
No, but on the latter point, there's not much point going into politics unless you're prepared to do your duty by the country, unless you're prepared to do what you think is right, even in difficult circumstances, unless you're prepared to step up to the plate when it's right for the country, when you're prepared to actually stick with it, despite all the pressures to do otherwise, when you're prepared to hold firm when others might buckle, and the Liberal Democrats have done that over the last 5 years. And of course that has led to a sort of dent in our short-term popularity. But I tell you, I'd much rather that than the Liberal Democrats having sort of standing back and wiping our hands clean of any responsibility for the affairs of the nation, and seeing unemployment going up, interest rates going up, the cost of living going up. I wouldn't want that on my conscience, and neither would any Liberal Democrat.
Right, you said at the beginning of the campaign you weren't going to start negotiating and laying down red lines, but subsequently the last few days you've done that. Well, you're like the other leaders making last-minute announcements. Could you just remind us what your conditions are for working, first of all, going back into coalition with David Cameron?
Yeah, so just on the first point, we've always been very clear about what the priorities are. We put them on the front page of our manifesto, balancing the books and doing so fairly, making sure that people don't pay any income tax on the first £12,500 that they earn, putting the money into the NHS that it needs and valuing mental health on the same footing as physical health, protecting spending in education and making sure there are qualified teachers in all classrooms, and protecting the environment. Okay. And just like you'll remember from your... No, hang on, but it comes to your point. The reason why I've sort of, if you like, gone a step further and announced this week that we will not enter into a coalition unless education spending is properly protected from the cuts that both Labour and the Conservatives are planning. The reason I've said that we won't enter into a coalition unless there is an early stability budget to make sure that the country and the markets and investors know that we have a plan to balance the books and do so fairly. The reason I've said that those are red lines for us, and I'm making further announcements during the course of this week on any additional red lines, is because I think, given the very fractured and fragmented nature of politics, given the very uncertain outcome of the election, and given the threat of uncertainty to our economic recovery, it's important that people are crystal clear about what they will get, come hell or high water, if they vote for Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, but see, but that's where it gets complicated, because let's take your pledge today to extend free school meals to all primary children, not just those at the infant levels. You say you'd do that when the books are balanced in 2017-2018, but as I understand it with Labour, you're not demanding that they balance the books by then. So, therefore, if there was a Lib pact, that promise is worthless.
Well, as it happens, I haven't said it's a red line. I'm being, of course, because I totally accept if you just draw red lines everywhere, then everyone it's just a great big standoff and nothing happens. I'm being responsible and specific
it doesn't mean
about
anything.
The red
it's a headline grabber.
No. Actually, as you might remember, 75% of the Liberal Democrat manifesto in 2010, in addition to all the front page priorities, have made their way into the coalition agreement. In fact, the Liberal Democrats have punched way above our weight. I lead a party of 8% of MPs in Westminster, and yet we had more of our manifesto in the coalition agreement than the larger party in the coalition, the Conservatives, did. And I would be determined to do that again, and I challenge anybody to explain why it's a bad idea to extend the provision of free school meals to children across all primary schools.
Free school meals is not included in your ring fence around education spending.
No, what I've said, exactly what I've said very carefully, is that I think it is essential that we provide money for nursery schools and colleges, which keeps up not only with the increase in prices, inflation, but also the increase of numbers of kids going into school. Now, Labour want to cut annually, by the end of the next Parliament, the money going into education by £2.5 billion, and the Conservatives, even more draconian, want to cut by £5 billion. That is simply unfair on the next generation, and I will not see the next generation being shortchanged by those Labour and Conservative cuts on nurseries and schools and colleges across the country.
And you wouldn't presumably match the pledge which David Cameron's given today on VAT, national insurance and income tax levels. I mean, you would see some room for some of those to go up.
Well, I just think it's such a bizarre stunt. I mean, if David Cameron trusts what a Conservative Chancellor were to do, why on earth does he need to pass a law? I mean, it shows a high level of sort of lack of self-confidence in the Conservative Party that they have to pass a law that they say that they would do if they won a majority. Very peculiar, really. And instead of having these stunts, I think what they should be doing is, instead of sort of giving with one hand with all these unfunded tax bungs and then taking with both hands, they should become clear with the British public before next Thursday on the level of the ideological cuts they want to impose on education, the level of cuts they want to impose on people who receive help through the welfare system who are down on their luck. That's where the Conservative Party needs to be more clear.
So what are your red lines for a coalition with Labour?
My red lines are the red lines for whoever wants to speak to the Liberal Democrats, and I've already set out one. I've set out one on Monday, which was that we're not going to abide by the cuts that Labour and the Conservatives want to impose on education. Then I set out that we would insist on a stability budget within 50 days of a new Parliament being formed, so that we create stability in the economy, don't jeopardise the economic recovery, and set out a plan by which we balance the books and do so fairly. And I'm setting out further red lines over the coming days so that people have a very, very clear view.
You also said you'd have no truck with deals with UKIP and the SNP. Now, UKIP not likely to have that many MPs. The SNP may well have more MPs than you do. They've said they wouldn't vote for the Tories, but you might require them to vote for a Labour-Lib pact effectively in Parliament. Would that be okay with you if they weren't just part of the deal, but they made it clear that they would support that?
Honestly, I think all these endless. I think we're starting to dance on the head of a pin with all these endless hypothetical
You raised that you wouldn't do deals with the SNP. I'm asking you what you meant.
I'm telling you what I meant. It's a very simple principle, which is that in the same way that I wouldn't put Nigel Farage in charge of a union, the European Union, that he wants to sort of pull apart, I simply don't understand why on earth anyone would put a party whose sole objective in life is to pull the United Kingdom apart in charge of the government of the United Kingdom. It's really not any more complicated than that, and that's why the Liberal Democrats won't enter into a sort of deal or arrangement with the SNP. And I think a government which is on life support system, where Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon can sort of pull the plug at any moment, in exactly the same way that a right-wing alliance, in which it's the right wing of the Conservative Party, Nigel Farage, the DUP and others who can basically pull the plug on the Conservative Party, I think that is just a really bad outcome for the United Kingdom, because it guarantees instability, populism and factionalism. OK, let's get this absolutely clear then. What you're saying is you would not form a minority coalition with Labour, because inevitably the SNP would hold the balance of power in that situation. So it's only if you've got more than a majority between you that you would consider a formal coalition with Labour. Is that right? It's what I said. I can only repeat myself. The Liberal Democrats will not enter into a government which is basically in existence at the say-so of either UKIP or the SNP.
I've got two questions for you then. One is on the very point you're just raising there. Whatever the result of this election, how much work do you think needs to be done now to repair the UK Constitution, given that the Scottish people clearly seem to be about to express a fairly radical view of the future of the Union?
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good question, and actually in many respects, partly because it's quite a sort of, it can be a sort of arcane debate, it hasn't assumed nearly enough importance in this election campaign. But my own view is that almost whatever the outcome of the election next Thursday, we are going to enter into a significant period of constitutional change and reform and renewal. That's an opportunity, and that's why I've always advocated a all-party constitutional convention, so that we can get together, involving people from outside politics, not just politicians, citizens, panel and so on can be involved, so that we can have a really good head-to-toe look at the imbalances and flaws in the British Constitution, because the tectonic plates, as you say, are shifting within the United Kingdom. And I tried to persuade David Cameron months ago now, in the wake of the Scottish referendum, in fact even before it, that we should announce as a coalition government that all-party constitutional convention. But you know, the Conservatives are not particularly interested in wholesale constitutional reform, only in very sort of bitty piecemeal reform. But it has to be done, and it has to be done, if possible, on a cross-party basis. And the sooner we can start an all-party a cross-party constitutional convention with participation of the public after May the 7th, the better.
And just finally, would the Lib Dems be doing better if Miriam was in charge?
I think the nation and the world would be doing better if Miriam was in charge. That's my general rule in life.
Mr. Clegg, thank you for joining us.